Hello, this podcast is presented by Greg Butler from Radio Sanford.
G'day, this is Greg Butler and welcome to Sanford Radio. Today I'm talking to Jeff Martell about soil health and the influence of aquatil technology. G'day Jeff and welcome to Sanford Radio.
Hello Greg, thanks for having me on.
Sanford members would remember you from coming to the very first time we demonstrated at the Sanford conference, and just wondering what your memories of that was and how we've developed the technology since.
Well, it was a lot of fun. We got to see the effects of water jet cutting for the first time. And I guess most importantly, the thing that sticks in my mind is the enthusiasm of the people around. Not being from the agricultural industry, I really didn't understand what the ultimate goal was, but I could see on the faces of the people that were watching the system run that we were achieving what they wanted or what they wanted to see. So it was exciting, and I feel, ever since that point, I've been feeding off the enthusiasm of the farmers that see the system working.
When we decided to go down the path of looking at a different cutting technology, that was really a farmer-driven exercise where people weren't just looking for an incrementally better knife point or an incrementally better disc seeder, but were really having a lot of challenges like getting through heavier stubble loads and hairpinning and so forth. And I guess over the years you've learned a lot about the challenges of a good conservation farming system.
I think I'm starting to understand how the system works. I certainly, from this point on, understand the challenges of getting through the heavy stubble loads, and I can tell by looking at it whether we're being successful or not.
I would suggest that ground engagement is really the key to the success of the technology. Maybe you could just quickly run through some of the things around ground engagement that you think are important, that technology developers that perhaps in the future take on aquatil as a core OEM and develop their own new range of seeders, sort of things that they need to be thinking about with regard to ground engagement.
One of the things about water jet streams is that the air around it has a tendency to want to dissipate it or break it up. So we've got about a 4 to 5 inch nice, clean, pristine stream. But as soon as that comes into contact with something, the air gets a chance to catch it and it wants to break it up. So with ground engagement and with light compression on the stubble or the material being cut, the less air we can have in the system, the better it works. So ideally the nozzle's as close to the ground as possible. Ideally we've got something applying some light force to the stubble or the matter being cut. And I think that's key. If the nozzle is far from the ground and the stubble is loosely woven with large air gaps in between, it doesn't cut nearly as well. It's capable of cutting the matter. It's the air pockets in between that disrupt the system.
I think we started up, having confidence that we'd probably need to use an 11 or 12 size nozzle. Then we got into around the 10 size. Demo cutting we did 2 years ago was with a 9. And then the installation we did at Bartleyville on Ben Marsh machine this year was using 10 9s and 8s, and we felt that the 8 was probably a pretty good fit. So we have been able to bring down the nozzle size. Perhaps you can just help explain why the nozzle size and bringing down the nozzle size is important to the logistics of water rate and cost and power and those sort of things.
Sure. The nozzle, it's a diameter that we're talking about, and the 9s and 10s are actually 0.010 inches or 0.009 inches. And the reason for our goal to reduce the nozzle size is because it's a circle. It's basically, it's an area. And a circle is, pi r squared determines the area. So, for instance, if we look at a 10 thou orifice, I always look at it as 10 times 10 being 100. When you switch from a 10 thou to a 9 thou orifice, 9 times 9 is 81. It's only 80% of a 10 thou orifice. So that percentage point, that's considerable, especially if you start looking at numbers like a 7 or a 6 thou orifice. 7 times 7 is 49. You could run 2 7 thou orifices in the place of one single 10 thou orifice. So as we reduce orifice size, we're reducing horsepower, and we're also reducing fluid rates. And our goal is to get it somewhere but below 8. Other factors that come into play are how thick the stubble is and what the stubble consists of. So we're still working on that, but the goal is to get it as small as possible to make it as cost-effective as possible.
So, Jeff, one of the things I've always found in agriculture is that farmers love to find out more about the technical aspects behind a technology, this type of horsepower and pressure, and maybe you can just describe some of the pressures that we're working with and how they actually technically cut.
We are cutting with a direct drive ultra high pressure pump. It's a triplex pump. It's a 3-piston pump, and we're generating pressures of up to 60,000 psi. Basically, what we're doing is we're pressurizing and slightly compressing the water to 60,000 psi, and then we are injecting it through a very, very small orifice, somewhere between 0.006 of an inch and 0.010 of an inch. When we drive the water through that orifice, we convert pressure to velocity. So the water comes out of the orifice at about Mach 3, and even though it's traveling at very, very high speed, the actual pressure applied to the part being cut is very, very low because the surface area is so small. So it's a very small surface area with very, very high pressures. And it's a shearing action, so the pressure of the water, or the velocity of the water, overcomes the strength of the material being cut, and it tears small pieces away. The pieces torn away are so small that it leaves you with an edge that looks like it was knife cut. But in fact, it was actually little pieces being torn away at very, very high speed.
Is there any good examples where a water jet is able to do something, for example, that a mechanical device doesn't really do that well, that might be analogous to the types of things we're doing, like trying to cut a thick, ropey residue on top of a really soft soil, and we don't want to push that residue in the ground? So there's sort of other things that we can sort of draw inspiration from.
There's probably plenty. There's one in particular is baked goods, like multi-layered pastries, cut wonderfully with water jet, and they are almost impossible to cut with traditional knives.
One of the ones I find really exciting is the vanilla slice, which is a type of cake, obviously, with icing and pastry on top, a layer of cream, some more pastry, a layer of custard, and some more pastry. Someone gives you some sort of flimsy plastic knife, that's just hopeless. But even with a sharp metal knife, it's nigh on impossible not to get downforce to squash that material out underneath. And, for me, I look at that and say, if we want to have a good ropey residue on top of the soil surface, it seems like something it's a great analogy. Jeff, one of the things I wanted to achieve by trying to develop the AquaTool technology was the ability to handle residues over really healthy soils. I'd like to probably explore some of your experiences as someone that's come into the industry, looking at some of these guys that have got some really good soil health going, and what your experience has been there.
I'm continually fascinated by the complexity of the ag industry. Being from the industrial world, things are much more cut and dry. The ag industry, so many things depend on so many others. These gentlemen are just a wealth of knowledge, and every minute I get to spend with them, I learn something. I consider myself partially educated over the last few years in some of this industry, but it is much more complex and interrelated than I ever realized. So it's very exciting to work with them. I got to see the difference firsthand a couple of weeks ago planting with David Brandt down in Lancaster, Ohio. He had a plot that he put aside that we were going to plant some corn into. It was cover cropped with a ryegrass and a legume. And the area around that, which was basically all part of the same field, just with different planting techniques going on, or different cover crop techniques. The area that we were in, I couldn't believe how moist the soil was and how much moisture was in the general area toward the bottom of the cover crop plants. We were surrounded by areas that didn't have any cover crop on them, and the field was parched dry. Where we were planting, there was plenty of moisture, and the temperature was about 29 degrees, whereas the open area, the ground temperature was 41 degrees, so it was considerably cooler as well. And it really made a startling difference, and it was really the first time I got a chance to truly see what the effects of cover crop would be as far as soil moisture retention. One of the things that continues to intrigue me is there was so much greenery in that cover crop, I couldn't understand why the ground wasn't drier due to those plants pulling the moisture out of the ground. I'm just fascinated by that system and how it works, because in one sense it doesn't make any sense. But the fact of the matter is that soil was full of moisture, it was soft, it was very healthy looking, whereas the stuff in the general field was actually starting to crack and looked basically like dry dirt to me. I mean, it clearly was making a difference.
Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Sanford Radio. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Jeff Martell, not only for today's episode of Sanford Radio, but supporting Sanford in its endeavour to bring a transformational technology to market.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
This is the South Australian No-Till Farmers Association Radio Sanford broadcast. Thank you for listening.